In northeastern Thailand, where ancient teak forests swallow the light and small villages exist on the fragile border between belief and fear. People still whisper about an ancient dark craft, Ngai Possesion. It is not merely a charm. Not simply a curse. It is a hunger that feeds on the soul, waiting for a body to inhabit. The story you are about to hear is not a legend. But what happens when someone opens a door that was meant to remain buried forever? Listen carefully, and do not answer if you hear your name in the dark. Chapter 1. The Village at the Edge of the Teak Forest. Ban Nong Kham did not appear on most maps. If it did, it was marked as a faint dot swallowed by a vast stretch of teak forest in Thailand's northeastern Isan region. The road leading there was little more than a ribbon of cracked asphalt dissolving into red dust. And by the time I arrived, the sun had already begun its slow descent behind the skeletal silhouettes of trees. The village looked ordinary at first glance, low wooden houses raised on stilts, rusted tin roofs shimmering in the heat, and thin columns of cooking smoke drifting into the evening sky. Cows wandered lazily across the dry fields. Children's laughter echoed somewhere in the distance. Yet beneath the stillness, something felt wrong. The air was too heavy, as if it had not moved in years. Even the wind seemed unwilling to pass through. As dusk approached, doors closed one by one. Windows were latched. Conversations died mid-sentence. By nightfall, Ban Nong Kham fell into a silence so complete it felt unnatural. Like the village itself was holding its breath. No one walked outside after dark. I had come because of Somchai. He was my cousin, though we had not seen each other in years. The message that reached me was brief and unsettling. Somchai is dead. Come if you can. There was no explanation, no details of illness or accident, only whispers carried by distant relatives, whispers that spoke of something older than disease. Something that did not belong to the living world. They said he died because of Ngai. I first heard the word as a child, told in hushed tones by elders who warned us not to wander into forbidden forests. Ngai was not merely a charm or curse. It was a thing fed with blood, bone, and spirit. A dark craft practiced by sorcerers who believed power could be grown like a parasitic plant inside the human soul. Most people dismissed such stories as superstition. Yet the villagers avoided my eyes when I mentioned Somchai's name. An old man selling betel nuts beside the road spat into the dust and muttered, "Some doors should not be opened again." When I asked what he meant, he turned away. As night settled over Ban Nong Kham, the forest surrounding the village seemed to press closer. Its darkness thick and impenetrable. Crickets screamed in waves. Somewhere deep among the trees, a lone bird cried out, a sharp, broken sound that ended too abruptly. I stood before Somchai's house at the far edge of the village, where the last row of homes gave way to the forest line. The structure leaned slightly, as though exhausted by years of enduring storms and heat. Beneath it, shadows pooled thickly between the stilts. No lights burned inside. No sound came from within. And though the night air was cooling, sweat slid slowly down my spine. I told myself it was grief, or fatigue from travel. But as I climbed the wooden steps and reached for the door, I felt it, a faint tremor beneath my feet, like something deep underground shifting in its sleep. I hesitated. Behind me, the village lay silent. Before me waited the house where Somchai died. And beyond it, the endless black wall of the teak forest watched without eyes. Chapter 2. The House Where the Air Does Not Move. Somchai's house stood on short wooden stilts at the very edge of Ban Nong Kham, where the last yard of packed dirt surrendered to creeping roots and the shadow of the teak forest. Up close, the structure looked older than the others in the village. The wood had darkened to a dull, oil-black sheen, swollen from years of rain and heat. The windows were shuttered from inside. No lantern light seeped through the cracks. I knocked once. The sound died against the door as if swallowed. When I pushed it open, the hinges gave a slow, reluctant groan, not loud, but strained, like something protesting my arrival. Inside, the air was thick and stale. It did not smell like an abandoned house. It smelled occupied, not by people, but by damp wood, trapped heat, and something faintly metallic beneath it all. The odor clung to the back of my throat. I stood still, waiting for my eyes to adjust. The last light of evening filtered through the slats, striping the floor with thin bands of dusty gold. Furniture remained exactly where it had been left: a low table, a woven mat, a shelf of enamel bowls, a calendar from 2 years prior still hanging crooked on the wall. Nothing appeared disturbed, yet the silence felt staged, as though the house were pretending to be empty. I stepped inside and the door drifted shut behind me. The air did not move. In most rural homes, even the slightest wind slips through gaps in the boards, stirring curtains, carrying the smell of fields and wood smoke. Here there was nothing. The heat sat motionless. Even my own breathing seemed muted, absorbed by the walls. I told myself the stillness came from poor ventilation. Still, I opened a window. The shutters resisted at first, then gave way with a dry crack. Cool evening air waited just beyond the frame, yet it did not flow inside. It lingered there, hesitant, as if unwilling to cross the threshold. A sudden unease crept across my skin. I left the window open anyway. The bedroom lay to the right. Sanchai's thin mattress remained on the floor, neatly rolled. A shirt hung from a nail in the wall. Dust had settled over everything, but not thickly, as though someone had lived here until very recently. On the far wall, faint scratches marred the wood. Long, uneven marks clustered near the floor. I crouched closer. They were not random. They resembled fingernail grooves. A voice outside made me start. I stepped back onto the porch and found an elderly woman standing near the bottom of the stairs. Her back was bent with age, her thin gray hair tied into a knot. She carried a woven basket of dried herbs and stared at the house rather than at me. "You shouldn't sleep there," she said without greeting. Her voice was barely louder than a whisper. "Why not?" I asked. She did not answer immediately. Her eyes moved slowly from the doorway to the shadow beneath the house. "At night," she murmured, "it breathes." A chill crept along my arms despite the heat. I waited for her to laugh, to reveal the statement as a joke meant to frighten an outsider. She did neither. Instead, she turned and shuffled away, sandals scraping softly against the dirt road. The last of the daylight drained from the sky. Inside, the house seemed darker than it should have been. I lit a small oil lamp and placed it near the wall. The flame flickered weakly, though there was no wind to disturb it. Night settled fully over Ban Nong Kham. No voices carried through the village. No radios hummed. Even the dogs did not bark. The silence pressed inward. I lay down on the woven mat, listening to the unfamiliar stillness, counting my breaths to slow the unease building inside my chest. Minutes passed. Or hours. I could not tell. Then, sometime deep in the night, I heard it. A long, slow exhale. It came from beneath the floorboards. I held my breath. The sound came again, faint, drawn out, like lungs filling and emptying in the dark earth below. The wood beneath my cheek felt warm. And with each measured breath from below, the floor rose almost imperceptibly, then sank again.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 3. The Jar Beneath the Floor. I did not sleep again after the breathing began. At first, I tried to convince myself it was the shifting of old wood adjusting to the night air, or small animals moving beneath the house. Rural homes often creaked and settled after sunset. Rats nested under floorboards. Lizards hunted in the dark. There were explanations for everything. Yet the sound beneath me did not scratch, scurry, or gnaw. It inhaled. It exhaled. Slow, patient, alive. Each time the sound returned, the woven mat beneath my back lifted almost imperceptibly, then settled again, as though the house itself rested upon a sleeping chest. I lay frozen, counting the seconds between each breath. After a long while, the sound stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise. When the first pale gray of dawn seeped through the wall slats, I rose with stiff limbs and a mouth dry from fear. Morning light revealed nothing unusual. The floorboards were still. Dust lay undisturbed. The air remained thick but ordinary. In daylight, terror loses its shape. I almost convinced myself the night had been an illusion, until I noticed the faint line in the floor near the center of the room, a seam where two planks did not meet cleanly. The wood there appeared newer, its nails less rusted than the others. Someone had opened the floor before. I fetched a knife from the kitchen shelf and pried at the seam. The wood resisted, then lifted with a brittle crack. A gust of stale, trapped air escaped upward, carrying the smell of damp soil and something faintly sweet, like rotting flowers left too long in stagnant water. Beneath the boards lay a shallow cavity. Inside it rested a clay jar wrapped in faded red cloth. The fabric had once been bright, but years of dust and moisture had dimmed it to a dull rust color. Yellowed threads bound it tightly in looping knots, each knot stiff with hardened wax. Dark stains mottled the surface. My fingers hovered above it. Every instinct urged me to leave it buried. Instead, I lifted it out. The jar was heavier than expected. Its surface felt cool and slightly damp, though the morning air was already warming. Faint symbols had been scratched into the clay, looping shapes and jagged lines that did not resemble any script I recognized. The cloth binding the lid had fused to the rim. It took several minutes to loosen the knots. When the final thread snapped, a soft whisper brushed my ear. I froze. The room remained empty. Heart pounding, I lifted the lid. Inside lay a dark mass of ash and soil, packed tightly together. Mixed within it were strands of coarse black hair, fragments of brittle bone, and what looked disturbingly like fingernails curled into yellowed crescents. Half buried at the center rested a small figure molded from hardened clay. It was shaped like an infant. Its limbs were curled inward, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. The eye sockets had been pressed deep, leaving hollow pits that seemed to absorb the light. The smell rising from the jar thickened, earth, decay, and a faint copper tang. My fingertips brushed the figure's surface. The whisper came again. Not from the room. Not from outside. From somewhere impossibly close, as if lips hovered beside my ear. You opened it. I dropped the lid. It struck the floor with a dull crack that echoed too loudly in the still house. Silence followed. But the air had changed. The heaviness pressing against my chest deepened, as though the room had filled with invisible water. A faint vibration trembled through the floorboards, subtle yet unmistakable. From beneath the open cavity came a slow, shuddering inhale. The jar in my hands felt warmer. I slammed the lid back into place and wrapped the cloth around it with shaking fingers, though I could no longer remember how the knots had been tied. Outside, the village stirred to life, distant voices. A rooster's cry, the creak of bicycle wheels along the dirt road. Normal sounds. Morning sounds. Yet as I set the jar beside the wall, I noticed something that sent a cold thread down my spine. The dust on the floor around the opening had shifted. Not in footprints. In narrow trails. Thin lines dragged through the dust, leading away from the cavity and disappearing beneath Somchai's rolled sleeping mat. As if something small had been pulled across the floor during the night. Or had crawled back into hiding before dawn. Chapter 4. The monk who spoke in whispers. I wrapped the jar in an old cloth and placed it inside my bag, though every instinct told me to leave it where I had found it. The house felt altered now, subtly wrong in a way I could not explain. The air pressed closer to my skin. Even the light filtering through the wall slats seemed dimmer, as if dust hung suspended where there had been none before. By mid-morning, the village had returned to its quiet routines. Women swept their yards with reed brooms. Men repaired fishing nets in the shade. A motorbike sputtered past and disappeared down the red dirt road. Life continued with deliberate normalcy. Yet conversation stopped when I approached. When I asked about Somchai, eyes lowered, hands busied themselves with unnecessary tasks. No one wanted to speak his name aloud. An elderly shopkeeper finally pointed toward the temple at the far end of the village. "If you must ask questions," he said, chewing beetles slowly, "ask the monk." The temple stood on slightly higher ground, overlooking the fields and the distant line of teak trees. Its roof tiles were chipped, its paint faded by decades of sun. Wind chimes fashioned from old brass bells hung from the eaves, though they made no sound in the still air. Inside the open hall, a single monk sat cross-legged upon a woven mat. He was thin, with skin drawn tightly across sharp cheekbones. and eyes that seemed older than the rest of him. His saffron robe was neatly folded, his posture perfectly still. For several moments he did not acknowledge my presence, as though he were listening to something far beyond the walls. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "You brought something with you." It was not a question. I set the wrapped jar before him. His gaze fell upon it, and the stillness in the room deepened. He did not touch the cloth. He did not lean closer. Yet the muscles in his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Where did you find it?" he asked. "Under the floor in Somchai's house." The monk inhaled slowly through his nose, as if steadying himself. Then he rose and crossed the hall to close the wooden doors. The dull thud of the latch echoed through the empty temple. Only then did he kneel again beside the jar. When he spoke next, his voice had lowered to a whisper. "Do not open it again." I already did. His eyes lifted to mine, and for the first time I saw unmistakable fear within them. Outside, a bird cried once and fell silent. The monk placed his palm lightly atop the cloth but did not press down. "This is not a charm," he murmured. "It is a vessel. Something was grown inside it, fed, strengthened, bound." He drew his hand away quickly, as though the clay beneath the fabric had burned him. "In this region," he continued, "there are practitioners who cultivate Ngai, not merely to curse, but to inhabit. They believe spirit and hunger can be planted like seeds. When the vessel weakens, the hunger seeks a new dwelling." A cold heaviness settled into my stomach. "You mean possession?" He shook his head slowly. "Possession implies struggle. This is different. Ngai eats the spirit first. When nothing remains, it enters what is left." The quiet inside the temple seemed to deepen, pressing against my ears. I remembered the whisper beside my ear. I remembered the breathing beneath the floor. The monk studied my face carefully. "Last night," he asked softly, "did you hear your name spoken?" I opened my mouth to answer, but the memory returned before the words could form. Somchai's voice rising from beneath the earth in my dream, thick with soil and distance. The monk did not wait for my reply. He closed his eyes briefly, as if confirming something he had already feared. "You should not have opened the jar," he whispered. A faint ringing filled my ears, though the bells outside remained motionless. "What happens now?" I asked. For a long moment he did not answer. When he did, his voice was barely audible. "It will listen." The temperature in the hall seemed to drop. The air brushed cool against the sweat on my neck. The monk leaned closer, his expression grave. "And when it grows hungry," he said, "it will learn the sound of your breath." The cloth around the jar shifted. Only slightly, but enough for both of us to see it.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 5. Footsteps Without Feet. I left the temple with the jar wrapped tighter than before, though the monk's warning echoed louder with every step I took away from him. "It will listen. It will learn the sound of your breath." The midday heat had thickened, pressing down over Ban Nong Kham like a heavy lid. Cicadas screamed from the trees. Smoke from cooking fires drifted lazily above the rooftops. Yet the village still carried that same strained quiet, as if every sound existed only on the surface of something deeper and watchful. I became aware of people observing me from shaded doorways. Their eyes did not linger long, but they returned again and again, drawn by something they would not name. By the time I reached Somchai's house, the forest behind it seemed closer than before. The trees stood in dense rows, their tall trunks rising like pillars into a canopy that swallowed the sky. The air beneath them looked darker, thicker, not shadow alone, but something that absorbed light rather than reflected it. I paused at the steps. For a moment, I considered leaving. Instead, I went inside. The house felt warmer than the outside air. Not the warmth of sunlight trapped in wood, but a damp, enclosed heat that clung to the skin. I placed the jar against the far wall and stepped back, as though distance might make it less present. The floorboards were still. No breathing. No vibration. Daylight diluted fear. I opened both windows and forced myself to move about the house, sweeping dust, washing bowls, occupying my hands with ordinary tasks. The normal rhythms of activity brought a fragile comfort. By late afternoon, I had almost convinced myself that the monk's fear had been superstition amplified by grief. But as evening approached, the atmosphere began to change. The cicadas fell silent first. Then the birds. Then the faint, distant sounds of the village faded, one by one, until only the hush of the forest remained. The silence did not fall. It gathered. Night came quickly. I lit the oil lamp before darkness settled fully. Unwilling to face the interior of the house unlit, the flame flickered weakly, stretching thin shadows across the walls. I lay on the mat again, telling myself I would remain awake. Sometime later, I realized I had been listening to my own breathing. Slow. Measured. Too loud. I tried to inhale more quietly. The silence seemed to lean closer in response. Then I heard it. A soft sound outside the house. Not footsteps. Not quite. A faint dragging whisper across dirt. It circled the house slowly. Once. Then again. I held my breath. The sound stopped directly beneath the window. Something brushed the wooden wall. A dry, sliding touch. I forced myself to rise and step toward the window. Each movement deliberate and slow to avoid sound. The oil lamp flame trembled as I passed, though there was no wind. I peered through the slats. The yard lay empty beneath the pale wash of moonlight. The packed earth was smooth, undisturbed. The bamboo fence cast thin, motionless shadows. Nothing moved. Nothing stood there. Yet the sensation of presence remained, a pressure in the air. Like someone standing too close behind you in a dark room. Then, from just below the window, came a dull tap. I recoiled. Another tap followed. Slow. Measured. Not the random knock of a branch in the wind. 3 taps. Then silence. My heart hammered so loudly I feared it would answer whatever waited outside. After a long moment, I leaned forward again. Moonlight revealed the ground clearly now. There were no footprints in the dirt. But near the base of the wall, the soil bore narrow grooves, shallow. Parallel lines dragged through the dust, as though something had been pulled slowly around the house. Or had crawled. A cold ripple moved through my chest. Behind me, the floorboards creaked softly. I turned. The jar remained against the wall where I had left it. But the cloth binding had loosened. Only slightly. Just enough for the lid beneath to show through. The oil lamp flickered once, then steadied. And from beneath the floorboards came a faint, patient sound. As if something below the house had begun to follow the rhythm of my breathing. Chapter 6. The Woman Without a Shadow. Morning arrived without birdsong. A gray light seeped through the wall slats, dull and lifeless, as though the sun had risen behind a veil of ash. I had slept little. Each time my breathing slowed toward rest, the faint echo beneath the floor seemed to match it, inhale for inhale, exhale for exhale, until fear dragged me back into wakefulness. The jar remained where I had left it, but the cloth wrapping had slipped further during the night. One corner sagged loose, exposing a thin crescent of clay beneath. I retied the knots with trembling fingers, pulling them tighter than before. When I stepped outside, the air felt damp and heavy, carrying the scent of wet soil despite the cloudless sky. The dirt yard bore no footprints from the night before. Only those narrow dragged grooves lingered faintly along the wall, already softening under the morning dust. Across the road, an old man paused mid-sweep to watch me. When our eyes met, he looked away quickly and resumed brushing the same patch of ground. I realized then that the villagers were not merely avoiding me. They were waiting. By midday, the heat had returned in full force. I walked toward the small cluster of stalls near the well at the village center, hoping movement and sunlight might shake loose the oppressive weight pressing against my thoughts. A few women sorted vegetables beneath woven palm awnings. A boy pumped water from the iron well, its handle squealing in protest. The ordinary sounds of daily life played out, but they felt distant, like noises heard underwater. At the far edge of the stall stood a small table draped in faded cloth. Bundles of incense, amulets, and dried herbs lay arranged in careful rows. Behind the table sat a woman I had not seen before. She watched me approach without blinking. She appeared to be in her 30s, though something in her stillness made her seem older. Her long black hair fell loose over one shoulder. Around her neck hung several amulets strung on dark thread. Thin cords of dried roots and bone fragments dangled from the edge of the table, clicking softly against one another. "Looking for protection?" she asked. Her Thai carried the soft, rolling accent of Isan, yet her voice was calm, almost detached. "I'm not sure what I'm looking for," I replied. Her gaze drifted briefly past my shoulder, toward the road leading back to Somchai's house. "You brought something into the village," she said. It was not a question. I hesitated. "Who are you?" "They call me Molly." She lifted a bundle of incense and set it down again, though her eyes never left my face. "The monk will tell you to pray," she continued. "Others will tell you to leave. Neither will help you now." A faint chill touched the back of my neck. "Why?" I asked. Her eyes lowered slowly to the ground beside her feet. Only then did I notice it. In the harsh noon sunlight, every object cast a sharp shadow across the packed earth, the table legs, the hanging roots, the boy at the well pumping water. But beneath Molly's chair, the ground remained evenly lit. There was no shadow. My breath caught before I could stop it. She looked up and saw that I had noticed. A faint smile touched her lips, though it held no warmth. "Some things," she said softly, "stop belonging entirely to the world of light." The sounds of the marketplace seemed to fade around us. Even the squeal of the well pump slowed, then stopped. Molly leaned forward slightly. "The guy has tasted your breath," she murmured. "Now it knows you are alive." A cold weight settled into my chest. "Can it be removed?" I asked. She studied me for a long moment, as if measuring something invisible. "Removed?" she repeated quietly. "No. Driven away. Perhaps. Starved. Bound again." Her fingers traced a slow circle on the table's surface. But hunger remembers. A sudden gust of wind swept across the well yard, scattering dust and lifting the edge of the cloth covering her table. The hanging bone charms clicked sharply together. Instinctively, I glanced at the ground again. Still no shadow. When I looked back up, Molly was watching me with an expression that felt almost like pity. "Tonight," she said, "do not answer if you hear your name." The boy at the well resumed pumping water. Voices returned. A motorbike rattled somewhere beyond the trees. The ordinary world slipped back into place, as though it had never paused. I turned to leave, my skin prickling with unease. "Wait," she called softly. I looked back. Molly's gaze had shifted toward the road behind me. "The forest is closer now," she said. I followed her eyes. From the village center, Somchai's house should not have been visible through the rows of buildings and trees. Yet between two wooden walls, I could see the dark line of the teak forest rising behind it. Closer than I remembered. When I turned back to ask her what she meant, Molly had already lowered her gaze to the incense bundles, as if the conversation had ended long ago. I walked back toward the edge of the village with the unsettling certainty that something unseen was walking with me, keeping pace just beyond the reach of sight, learning the rhythm of each breath I took.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 7. The Smell of Wet Earth. The road back to Somchai's house seemed longer than before. Though the distance had not changed, the air felt denser, thick with a moisture that clung to my skin and slowed each step. The sun burned overhead, yet beneath the heat lingered the unmistakable scent of damp soil, the smell of ground freshly turned after rain. But it had not rained. The scent followed me. With every breath, it settled deeper into my lungs. By the time I reached the house, my shirt clung to my back with sweat. The forest behind the yard stood unnaturally still. Not a single leaf stirred. The shade beneath the teak trees looked heavy enough to pour. I paused at the base of the steps. The smell was stronger here. Wet earth, rotting leaves, something older beneath it, a sweetness like decayed flowers left sealed in darkness. I checked the yard carefully before climbing the stairs. The dirt remained smooth except for the faint remnants of the narrow grooves along the wall. They had softened under drifting dust, but their direction was clear, circling the house. Watching. Waiting. Inside, the heat pressed against me like damp cloth. I set my bag down and immediately noticed the jar. It had not moved. Yet the cloth binding had slipped further, revealing more of the clay surface. A thin crack ran across the lid, jagged and hairline, as though pressure from within had strained it. I retied the knots with trembling fingers, this time wrapping an extra strip of cloth around the entire jar. The clay felt warmer than the surrounding air. I withdrew my hands quickly. The smell of wet earth intensified. I spent the afternoon trying to occupy myself, sweeping, cleaning, opening and closing windows in an effort to stir the stagnant air. Nothing changed. The heat remained trapped inside. The faint metallic taste at the back of my throat returned each time I inhaled deeply. By late afternoon, the scent of damp soil had grown strong enough to taste. It clung to my tongue, to my clothes, to my skin. I washed my hands repeatedly in a basin of water, but the smell returned within seconds, rising from my pores as though it came from beneath the skin rather than from the surface. As dusk approached, the cicadas began their relentless chorus. Then, as the light dimmed toward amber, they stopped. Not gradually. All at once. The silence that followed felt immense. I stood near the window, watching the last strip of sunlight retreat from the yard. The forest line darkened, its shadows deepening into a single unbroken mass. The smell of wet earth thickened further. Behind me, something touched the floor. A faint, dry contact. I turned quickly. Nothing moved. The jar sat where I had left it, wrapped tightly, motionless. Yet a thin trail of dark dust had appeared beside it, a narrow line extending only a few inches across the wood before fading into nothing. As though something damp had brushed the floor and then withdrawn. Night fell. I lit the oil lamp earlier than before. The flame struggled, shrinking and stretching as if the air itself resisted combustion. Shadows gathered thickly in the corners of the room, pooling where the lamplight could not reach. The smell was unbearable now. Wet soil. Open graves. A sweetness beneath decay that turned my stomach. I pressed my sleeve over my nose. But the odor remained, not in the air, but inside my breath. It was coming from me. Panic rose, sharp and sudden. I stumbled outside into the yard, gulping the night air. For a moment, relief washed through me. The outside air carried only the faint dryness of dust and bamboo. Then I inhaled again. The smell remained. Inside my lungs. Inside my throat. Inside my breath. From somewhere in the darkness beyond the fence came a slow, dragging sound. I froze. The sound moved along the perimeter of the yard, circling just beyond sight. Not footsteps, not the tread of an animal. A sliding, patient movement across dirt. The cicadas did not resume. The forest remained silent. The smell of wet earth thickened until it seemed to fill my skull. Behind me, the floorboards inside the house creaked softly. Then came a faint vibration beneath my feet. Slow. Measured. A breath rising through the stilts. I stepped back onto the porch, every muscle rigid. From beneath the house came a long, shuddering inhale. The boards lifted almost imperceptibly. And with the exhale that followed, the smell of fresh-turned soil surged upward, thick, damp, and suffocating, as though something buried deep below had opened its mouth and breathed into the night. Chapter 8. Dreams of the Buried. Sleep did not come willingly. I lay on the woven mat staring at the ceiling beams, counting the seconds between each faint vibration rising from beneath the house. The smell of wet earth still lingered in my breath, thick and clinging, as though my lungs had been packed with soil. Even when I covered my face with my sleeve, the scent remained, intimate, inescapable. Outside, the village lay silent. Inside, the air felt heavy enough to drink. I told myself I would remain awake. At some point, I failed. The dream began with darkness pressing against my eyelids. Not the darkness of night, but a dense, suffocating blackness that seemed to have weight. My chest tightened, my arms refused to move. Something pressed down across my ribs, firm and unyielding. I tried to inhale. Soil filled my mouth. Cold earth packed against my lips and teeth. The taste was thick, mineral, suffocating. Panic exploded inside my chest as I realized I could not move my hands. They were pinned at my sides, trapped in narrow confinement. I was buried. The weight above me pressed harder with every shallow breath. Dirt filtered into my nostrils. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Frantic and deafening. I forced my eyes open. Darkness remained. No sky. No light. Only the crushing pressure of earth surrounding my body. I tried to scream. The sound died in mud. A vibration traveled through the soil. At first I thought it was my heartbeat echoing through the ground. Then it came again, a slow, rhythmic tremor, like something shifting its weight somewhere above me. Footsteps. Measured. Unhurried. The soil above my face loosened slightly. A thin thread of dirt slid downward across my cheek. Then I saw it. A faint glow filtered through the packed earth overhead, dim, gray light leaking through cracks in the soil. A shadow passed across it. Someone stood above my grave. My chest convulsed as I tried to breathe. Dirt collapsed inward with each shallow inhale. My lungs burned. The shadow lingered. Then the soil above my face broke apart. A small opening formed, just wide enough for light to spill through. And through that opening, a face appeared. Samchai. His skin was pale and stretched tight across his cheekbones. Soil clung to his hair and filled the corners of his eyes. His lips hung slightly open, revealing teeth packed with dark earth. His eyes were wrong. They reflected no light. They did not see me. They looked through me. "You shouldn't fight it," he said. His voice reached me as though traveling through water and stone, thick, muffled, impossibly distant. My chest convulsed again. Dirt slid into my mouth. I tried to move. I could not. His head tilted slowly, as if listening to something beneath the soil. "It hurts more," he continued softly, "when you resist." The opening above me widened. Loose soil spilled downward, filling the space around my neck. Cold dirt slid beneath my collar, into my ears, across my eyelids. Behind Samchai, something moved in the darkness. Not a shape. A shifting absence of light. The ground trembled. The soil around my ribs tightened. And from somewhere below, deeper than the grave, deeper than roots and stone, came a slow, patient inhale. The earth compressed around my chest. Then released. Breathing. The ground itself was breathing. Samchai's mouth opened slightly wider. Wet soil crumbled from between his teeth. "It is almost ready," he whispered. The darkness behind him leaned closer. I felt something cold press against the back of my skull beneath the earth. As if unseen fingers tested the shape of my head. My lungs screamed. Dirt filled my throat. The last thread of light vanished as the soil collapsed inward. I woke with a violent gasp. The oil lamp had burned low, its flame a thin trembling thread. Sweat drenched my body. My chest heaved painfully as air flooded back into my lungs. My mouth tasted of soil. I sat upright, choking, and spat onto the floor. Dark grains scattered across the wood. I stared at them, my heart hammering. More dirt clung to my tongue. A faint pressure lingered across my ribs, as though the weight of the earth had not fully lifted. From beneath the floorboards came a slow, deliberate exhale. I froze. The house was silent. The air was still. But the woven mat beneath me rose almost imperceptibly. Then sank again. In the dim lamplight, I saw faint traces of soil across my chest, as though dust had seeped through the fabric of my shirt while I slept. And deep inside my lungs, something cold seemed to settle, patient, listening, and waiting for my next breath.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 9. The Pit Behind the House. The taste of soil lingered long after dawn. I rinsed my mouth until the basin water turned cloudy. Yet the grit between my teeth returned within minutes. Each breath still carried the damp scent of turned earth, as if the dream had not ended but merely retreated beneath waking thought. I avoided looking at the floor where the dark grains had fallen during the night. When I finally forced myself to check, they were gone. No trace remained. The jar stood against the wall, its cloth bindings drawn tight. The thin crack across the lid had lengthened by a hair's breadth. I could not be certain it had changed, yet the longer I stared, the more the fracture resembled a line forced outward from within. I left the house to breathe air that did not belong to enclosed spaces or buried things. Behind the yard, where the bamboo fence sagged toward the forest line, the ground dipped slightly. I had noticed it before but dismissed it as uneven soil. In the gray morning light, the depression appeared more deliberate, a shallow mound of earth tamped down and hardened. The smell was stronger there. Wet soil. Decay. Something faintly sweet beneath it. I stepped closer. The dirt covering the mound differed from the surrounding yard. Its surface was compacted in overlapping layers, as though shoveled in haste and pressed flat without care. A few stones lay scattered atop it, not arranged, merely dropped. I crouched and pressed my palm against the ground. Cold. Damp. Despite weeks without rain, a faint tremor passed beneath my hand. I withdrew it quickly, heart racing. It did not repeat. I told myself it had been my pulse. The villagers pretended not to see me watching the mound. When an elderly man approached to gather fallen bamboo branches near the fence, I asked him what lay buried there. He paused only briefly before answering. "Old trash," he muttered. He did not meet my eyes. "Then why cover it so carefully?" His grip tightened on the branches. Some things should stay buried. He left without another word. By midday, the heat had intensified, baking the packed dirt until it cracked in thin lines. Yet the mound remained dark and damp, its color deeper than the surrounding earth. The smell clung to my skin. The memory of the dream pressed against my ribs. Before I could reconsider, I fetched a rusted spade leaning against the side of the house. The first thrust into the mound met unexpected resistance, as though the soil had been compressed beyond natural density. When it finally gave way, a thick odor surged upward, rot, stagnant water, and the copper sweetness of decay long sealed from air. I swallowed against rising nausea and dug again. The soil grew darker with each layer removed. Clumps broke apart reluctantly, sticking together in damp masses. Flaking roots tangled through the dirt, brittle yet resistant. A fly landed on my wrist. Then another. Within minutes, several circled lazily above the disturbed earth, drawn by the scent rising from below. My hands trembled, but I continued. The spade struck something with a dull, hollow sound. I froze. Carefully brushing the soil aside, I uncovered a fragment of bone, small, curved, stained dark with age. It did not resemble the long bones of livestock discarded for dogs to gnaw. It was thinner, fragile. I uncovered more. A scattering of bones lay beneath the surface, mixed with clotted soil and scraps of charred cloth. Some were animal remains, rib fragments, a jawbone. Others were smaller. Too small. A brittle length no thicker than my finger. A partial skull fragment no larger than my palm. My stomach twisted. Flies gathered in greater numbers, their buzzing thickening the air. Beneath the bones lay scraps of yellowed paper fused together by moisture and time. Faint ink markings had bled into shapeless stains. Threads of red string tangled through the debris like dried veins. The smell intensified until it seemed to coat my throat. Then the spade struck something smooth. I cleared the soil away with my hands. A small, rounded shape emerged. A skull. Not fully formed. The delicate curvature suggested an infant. My breath caught in my chest. The air around me seemed to collapse inward, pressing tight against my ears. From somewhere beneath the exposed pit came a faint sound. A soft whimper. I froze, hands buried in damp soil. The sound came again. Thin. Weak. Unmistakably the cry of a child. I jerked backward, scrambling away from the pit. The spade fell from my grip, striking the ground with a dull clang. The flies scattered, then returned. The pit lay open, silent. Only the low hum of insects filled the air. I forced myself to listen. Nothing. No cry. No movement. My pulse roared in my ears. Behind me, the house creaked softly. I turned. The jar inside, visible through the open doorway, rocked once. A slow, subtle tilt. Then stilled. The air thickened. The smell of wet earth surged upward from the pit, stronger than before, as though something deep below had stirred at the touch of light. Flies lifted in a sudden cloud. From the darkness at the bottom of the hole came a faint vibration, traveling through the soil and into my bare feet. A slow inhale seemed to rise from beneath the ground. I stumbled backward toward the porch, unable to look away. The earth inside the pit shifted slightly, settling inward as if something beneath had exhaled. And from the open doorway behind me, the floorboards answered with a soft, deliberate creak, as though the house itself had heard the cry from the ground and was listening for it again. Chapter 10. When the guy enters. I did not fill the pit. I could not bring myself to touch the soil again. By late afternoon, I had pushed the loose earth back over the exposed bones with the flat of the spade, avoiding the deeper layers where the smell thickened into something unbearable. The mound looked undisturbed from a distance, yet I knew what lay beneath: fragments of ritual, fragments of lives, and something far older than either. The flies lingered long after I stopped digging, even when the air grew still, even when the smell settled back into the ground. Inside the house, the atmosphere had changed. The heat no longer felt merely stagnant, it felt occupied. The air pressed against my skin with a damp, intimate weight, as if the space around me had narrowed by unseen degrees. The faint metallic taste returned to the back of my tongue. The jar rested where I had left it, but the cloth binding was loose again. Not untied. Slipped, as though something inside had shifted against its restraint. I did not touch it. Toward evening, I returned to the temple. The sky had begun its slow descent into amber, and long shadows stretched across the dirt paths like reaching fingers. Smoke from cooking fires drifted low, refusing to rise. The forest beyond the fields appeared darker than it should have been at that hour, its edge indistinct, as if distance itself had thinned. Inside the temple hall, the air felt cooler. Monk Kittipong sat where I had seen him before, motionless, his hands resting lightly upon his knees. The brass bells hanging from the eaves remained silent. He looked at me for a long time before speaking. "You dug behind the house." It was not a question. I nodded. His eyes closed briefly. "The bindings were meant to contain it," he said softly. "Bone, ash, root, and breath. These are used to anchor hunger to a place. When disturbed, the hunger wanders." A chill spread across my shoulders. I heard something, I whispered. "A child crying." The monk's jaw tightened. "Echoes remain where suffering is fed," he replied. "Not all cries belong to the living." The silence deepened between us. He rose slowly and crossed the hall to retrieve a small hand mirror from a low shelf. The glass was old, its surface slightly clouded, framed in dark wood worn smooth by years of handling. He returned and knelt before me. "Look," he said. I hesitated, then took the mirror. At first, I saw only my own face, drawn, sleepless, streaked faintly with dust. But as I tilted the mirror toward the light, something felt wrong. My eyes did not reflect the glow from the open doorway behind me. The pupils seemed too large, swallowing the brown irises. The whites held a faint gray cast, as though veiled by thin smoke. I blinked. The image blinked with me. Yet the dullness remained. The monk studied my reflection rather than my face. "The spirit weakens before the body knows," he murmured. "Ngai does not force its way in. It empties, slowly, patiently." A faint ringing filled my ears. "What happens when it is empty?" I asked. He did not answer immediately. Outside, a lone bird cried and fell silent. "When nothing remains," he said at last, "the vessel is no longer yours." The air in the temple cooled further. Gooseflesh rose along my arms. I lowered the mirror, but the sensation lingered, as if something inside my skull had leaned closer to peer out through my eyes. That night, the village grew silent earlier than before. No voices. No radios. No dogs. Only the faint whisper of dry leaves against dirt. Inside the house, I lit the oil lamp and sat upright against the wall, unwilling to lie down. The jar remained in my peripheral vision. I did not look at it directly. Time stretched. My breathing sounded too loud. I tried to slow it. Inhale. Exhale. From beneath the floorboards came a faint answering rhythm. Matching. Learning. My chest tightened. A pressure gathered behind my eyes. Dull and spreading, the air felt thicker with each breath. Heavier, harder to draw into my lungs. The smell of damp soil returned. Faint at first, then stronger, rising from somewhere within my throat. I pressed my palm to my chest. My heartbeat felt distant, muted, as if echoing from far away. The lamp flame flickered violently though the air remained still. Shadows rippled across the walls like dark water. A whisper brushed the inside of my skull. Not heard. Felt. Hungry. My spine stiffened. Cold seeped into my limbs, spreading outward from my chest. My fingers numbed. My breath came shallow and thin. The floorboards beneath me rose slightly, then settled. I tried to stand. My legs did not respond. The whisper returned, closer now, curling through my thoughts like damp smoke. Almost empty. The lamp flame shrank, stretching thin and blue. The jar's lid clicked softly. My mouth opened to breathe, but the inhale felt obstructed, as though the air entering my lungs had thickened into mud. Inside my chest, something shifted. Not pain. Not pressure. Occupation. A cold presence spread slowly behind my ribs, patient and deliberate, pressing outward as though testing the shape of its new confinement. My vision darkened at the edges. The whisper deepened, no longer distant but resonating through bone and marrow. This one will hold. The lamp went out. Darkness swallowed the room. In the silence that followed, my lungs drew breath again, deeper this time, smoother, as if guided by unfamiliar rhythm. And somewhere beneath that breath, another inhalation moved in perfect harmony, as though something within me had finally found a place to rest.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 11. Whispers Beneath the Skin. I woke before dawn with my body already sitting upright. For several seconds, I did not remember moving. My back rested against the wall. My hands lay on my knees. The oil lamp beside me had burned to a pool of hardened wax. Pale light seeped through the slats, turning the interior of the house into a dim gray cage. My lungs drew a slow, steady breath. It did not feel like my rhythm. I held the inhale. A second pulse inside my chest seemed to continue, patient and unhurried. Then both breaths released together. A thin thread of cold slid along my spine. The jar remained against the wall, but its cloth bindings had loosened again. The knot I had tightened the night before hung slack. Its fibers stretched as if dampened from within. The hairline crack across the lid had widened enough to show a line of darkness beneath. I stared at it for a long time. The house was silent. No breathing rose from the floor. No vibration trembled through the boards. The stillness should have brought relief. Instead, it felt like waiting. When I stood, a wave of dizziness washed through me. My balance faltered, and I caught myself against the wall. My fingers tingled, then numbed. The sensation passed quickly, leaving a faint chill in its wake. I stepped outside. Morning light lay thin across the yard. The mound behind the fence looked undisturbed, though the soil had darkened overnight as if freshly turned from below. No flies lingered now, no odor rose. Yet the smell of damp earth remained in my breath. I inhaled deeply. The scent answered from inside my chest. At the well, villagers gathered in small clusters, speaking in low voices. Conversations thinned when I approached, then stopped entirely. A child stared openly until his mother pulled him close and turned him away. I realized then that people were not avoiding my eyes. They were avoiding my breath. One man covered his mouth briefly as he passed. Another made a quick gesture at his chest, fingers brushing an amulet beneath his shirt. The space around me widened as I walked. I found Molly at her table, arranging bundles of incense with slow, deliberate care. The morning sun cast sharp shadows across the ground. Every object cast a shadow. Except her. She looked up as I approached, and the faintest crease formed between her brows. "You did not sleep," she said. "I dreamed," I replied. Her gaze lingered on my face, searching. "Dreams are doors," she murmured, some open from both sides. I swallowed, my throat dry. Something is wrong inside me. Her eyes lowered briefly to my chest, as if listening. "Yes," she said softly. The marketplace sounds seemed to dim around us. I leaned closer. "Can you feel it?" She did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached out and stopped just short of touching my wrist. Her fingers hovered in the air, trembling slightly. Then she withdrew them. "It has begun to settle," she whispered. Cold spread through my stomach. "Can it be stopped?" She studied me with an expression that held neither comfort nor cruelty, only quiet certainty. "It can be resisted," she said, "but hunger does not abandon a vessel it has entered." A faint ringing filled my ears. I became aware of a subtle sensation beneath my skin, a slow, crawling pressure along my forearms, like cold water moving through narrow channels just below the surface. I rubbed at the feeling, but it remained, traveling upward toward my shoulders. Molly's gaze followed the motion. "Do you feel it moving?" she asked. I nodded. "It is learning the shape of you." The words landed with a weight that stole my breath. As I turned to leave, a whisper brushed the inside of my skull. Not sound. Sensation. A dry, intimate presence curling through thought. Warm. I stopped walking. The market noises continued around me. Oblivious. Alive. My pulse thudded painfully in my throat. I pressed my hand against my chest. The second rhythm pulsed faintly beneath my own. Hungry. I forced myself to keep walking. The path back to Somchai's house felt narrower than before. The forest edge loomed darker, its shadow stretching farther across the ground despite the rising sun. Inside the house, the air felt close and damp. The jar clicked softly. I turned. The lid had shifted. Only slightly, but enough for a thin line of dark ash to seep from the crack and dust the floor. The crawling sensation beneath my skin intensified, spreading across my ribs, threading between muscle and bone like cold roots searching for purchase. I pressed both hands against my chest as a shudder moved through me. Inside, something shifted. Not violently. Deliberately. Testing. Listening. And beneath my skin, faint and patient, came the sensation of something whispering along the nerves, learning their paths, memorizing their reach, settling deeper with each breath I took. Chapter 12. The village that pretends not to see. The day moved forward as if nothing had changed. Sunlight spread across the fields. Motorbikes rattled along the dirt road. Women washed clothes beside clay basins while children chased each other between the stilt houses. Smoke rose from cooking fires and drifted lazily into the pale sky. Ban Nong Kham appeared ordinary. Only the spaces around me told the truth. People stepped aside without realizing they had done so. Conversations softened when I passed. No one stood close enough for our shoulders to brush. Even the dogs that roamed the village lanes lowered their heads and moved away, tails tucked tightly between their legs. They did not look at me, but they felt me. And I felt it too, a slow, cold presence coiled behind my ribs, listening to the world through my breath. By midday, the crawling sensation beneath my skin had settled into a dull, constant pressure. It no longer moved as sharply as before. Instead, it rested in layers, like something folded carefully inside my chest. Occasionally, a faint pulse spread outward from my sternum, radiating through my shoulders and down my arms, leaving numbness in its wake. When I pressed my fingers to my wrist, my pulse beat normally, yet beneath it, deeper and slower, another rhythm lingered. Patient. Unhurried. Waiting. I walked to the well again, hoping the presence of others might anchor me to something human. The iron pump squealed with each downward thrust. Water splashed into dented metal buckets. Voices rose and fell in quiet conversation. When I approached, the sounds thinned. A woman gathering water paused mid-motion. A man straightened and stepped aside without meeting my gaze. The boy at the pump slowed his movements, his eyes fixed on the ground. No one spoke. I became aware of my breathing, slow, measured, heavier than before. A faint metallic tang lingered on the air around me. The boy's mother reached out and pulled him gently back from the well. Not roughly. Not in fear. But in quiet certainty. I turned away and walked toward the small shrine near the banyan tree at the edge of the village. Incense sticks burned in a cracked clay pot before a weathered spirit house. Offerings of sticky rice and wilted marigolds lay scattered on the wooden platform. The incense smoke rose in thin, wavering lines. As I stepped closer, the smoke shifted. Not with the wind. Toward me. It bent subtly, drawn as though by a faint current. The smell of wet earth thickened in my lungs. A whisper stirred at the edge of perception. Closer. I stepped back. The smoke straightened again. My heart pounded. By late afternoon, the heat pressed down like a physical weight. Even the cicadas sounded weary, their chorus wavering and uneven. The forest line beyond the fields appeared darker than the surrounding landscape. Its edge blurred as if the trees leaned closer with each passing hour. When I reached Somchai's house, the air felt cooler near the porch. Not relief. Absence. Inside, the jar sat where I had left it. A thin trail of ash had spilled from the crack in the lid, dusting the floor in a faint gray crescent. The cloth binding had slackened again, its fibers stretched and darkened with damp. I did not touch it. I could feel it. Not warm. Not cold. A faint awareness radiating outward, like the pressure before a storm. As evening approached, the village retreated into itself. Doors closed. Voices faded. Lanterns dimmed. The silence did not fall all at once, it deepened gradually. Layer by layer, until even the smallest sounds, a shifting board, a distant cough, seemed intrusive. I sat inside the house, listening to my breath. Inhale. Exhale. A faint answering rhythm pulsed beneath my ribs. The crawling sensation returned, spreading slowly across my abdomen, threading upward into my throat like cold vapor. My tongue felt heavy. My mouth filled with the taste of damp soil. Outside, something brushed the bamboo fence. A dry, dragging sound. It circled the yard once, then stopped. The air thickened. From the far side of the village came a sudden cry, brief, sharp, and abruptly cut off. Silence swallowed it instantly. No voices followed. No footsteps ran toward the sound. The village did not react. Ban Nong Kam did not see. Ban Nong Kam did not hear. Ban Nong Kam had learned to remain still. Inside my chest, the second rhythm pulsed slowly, steadily, as though counting something beyond time. The whisper returned, faint and intimate, threading through bone and breath. They do not look. They do not speak. They know hunger walks again. My lungs tightened. I strained to listen. No further sound came from the village. Only the vast, oppressive silence. And beneath it, deep within my chest, something listening with growing patience.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 13. The Night of Blood. The night pressed down heavier than any before it. No insects sang. No wind moved through the teak trees. Even the distant creak of wood and bamboo that usually marked the cooling of evening air did not come. Ban Nong Kam lay in a silence so complete it felt deliberate, as if the village itself had withdrawn into hiding. Inside Somchai's house, the oil lamp burned with a weak, unsteady flame. Its light seemed unable to reach the corners of the room, where darkness gathered in thick, unmoving pools. I sat against the wall, forcing myself to remain awake. My breathing sounded wrong. Too deep. Too slow. Each inhale filled my chest with the smell of damp soil and something faintly metallic, like rust dissolving in stagnant water. Beneath my ribs, the second rhythm pulsed steadily, patient, unhurried, no longer searching but settled. Waiting. Sometime deep into the night, my vision blurred. The lamplight stretched into thin threads. Shadows wavered like dark water. A dull pressure built behind my eyes, spreading downward into my jaw and throat. My fingers went numb. The crawling sensation beneath my skin returned, slow and deliberate, threading along my spine and across my shoulders like cold roots seeking deeper ground. A whisper stirred inside my skull. Hungry. My chest tightened. I pressed my hand against my sternum, feeling both rhythms beat beneath my palm. Hungry. The lamp flame flickered violently. Darkness surged and retreated along the walls. My lungs drew a breath that felt guided, deeper than I intended. Smoother than my own control. Feed. The room tilted. The last thing I remembered was the lamp flame stretching thin and blue as darkness swallowed the edges of my sight. I woke to the taste of iron. My mouth was wet. Warm. The oil lamp had burned out. Pale moonlight leaked through the slats, casting thin silver lines across the floor. For a moment, I did not understand what I was seeing. My hands lay in my lap. They were dark. Sticky. I lifted them slowly toward my face. Blood coated my fingers. Thick. Half-dried. My stomach twisted violently. I staggered to my feet and stumbled toward the doorway. The night air struck my face like cold water. The yard lay washed in pale moonlight. Silent and still. Something lay near the base of the steps. A shape. Low to the ground. I approached slowly, my breath shallow. It was a dog. One of the strays that wandered the village lanes during the day, thin. Wary, always keeping distance from people. Its body lay twisted unnaturally on the dirt. Its chest had been torn open. The ribs spread outward like broken fingers. Dark blood soaked the earth beneath it, still wet enough to glisten in the moonlight. Flies had not yet come. The air smelled sharp and metallic. My stomach lurched. I staggered backward, choking, wiping my hands against my shirt as though I could erase the evidence clinging to my skin. I had no memory of leaving the house. No memory of this. My gaze dropped to the ground near the body. The dirt bore disturbances, not footprints. Dragged grooves. Parallel lines carved shallowly into the dust. They led from the yard. To the steps. To the doorway behind me. A cold tremor moved through my chest. Inside the house, a board creaked softly. I turned. The interior lay in shadow. The jar sat against the wall. Its lid had shifted. A thin smear of dark ash trailed across the floor like a black tear. My pulse roared in my ears. I backed away from the doorway, my breath shaking. From somewhere within my chest, faint and intimate, the whisper returned, not distant now, but resonating through bone and marrow. Warm. The smell of blood thickened in the air. Alive. My hands trembled violently. Hungry. A wave of dizziness washed over me. For a moment, the yard tilted, the trees bending inward like dark witnesses. I pressed both hands against my chest. Beneath my heartbeat, the second rhythm pulsed with slow, terrible satisfaction. Behind me, from inside the house, came a soft clicking sound. The jar's lid shifted again. The village remained silent. No doors opened. No voices called out. Ban Nong Kam did not come to see. Ban Nong Kam did not ask. Above the torn body and the dirt, the moon drifted behind a thin veil of cloud. And in the thickening darkness, I realized with a cold, sinking certainty, something inside me had fed. And it was no longer weak. Chapter 14. The Binding Rite. By dawn, the blood on the dirt had turned black. No one came to collect the dog's body. No one asked what had happened in the night. When I stepped into the road, villagers moved as they always did, quietly, deliberately, as if guided by routines older than memory. Yet their distance from me had widened. Eyes lowered sooner. Hands tightened around amulets. Even the dogs that roamed the far lanes did not approach the edge of the yard. Ban Nong Kam knew. Ban Nong Kam would not speak. I buried the animal myself near the fence, using the back of the spade so I would not have to look closely at what I had done, or what had been done through me. The soil released that same thick, damp odor as it parted. Each breath I drew tasted of iron and earth. Beneath my ribs, the second rhythm pulsed slow and steady, like a heart that did not belong to flesh. By midday, the monk sent for me. The temple doors were closed when I arrived. Inside, the air smelled of incense and old wood. 3 additional monks knelt beside Kittipong, their saffron robes arranged in careful folds. Wax candles flickered in shallow bowls of sand. Thin threads of smoke curled upward, gathering beneath the dark rafters. No bells hung from the eaves now. The wind chimes had been removed. Kittipong's eyes lingered on my face longer than before. "It has fed," he said quietly. I did not answer. He did not need confirmation. One of the monks spread a length of white thread across the floor, forming a circle around a woven mat at the center of the hall. Another placed small clay bowls at the 4 directions, ash in one, water in another, crushed herbs in the third, and coarse salt in the fourth. Kittipong gestured for me to sit. The hunger has found its way into your breath, he said. If it roots deeper, you will not remain. A cold weight settled in my stomach. What happens if it stays? I asked. He held my gaze. It learns your body, he replied, then it keeps it. The silence that followed felt vast. They bound my wrists loosely with white thread and guided me to sit cross-legged within the circle. The thread felt cool against my skin, yet beneath it my pulse throbbed with dull pressure. The monks began to chant. Their voices were low, steady, and rhythmic, vibrating through the wooden floor and into my bones. The sound seemed less like speech and more like resonance, a tone that pressed against the chest and skull alike. At first, nothing happened. Then the air grew colder. Gooseflesh rose along my arms. The crawling sensation beneath my skin returned, threading upward through my ribs, tightening around my throat. My breath faltered. The chant deepened. The candles flickered violently though no wind stirred. Inside my chest, the second rhythm quickened. A whisper stirred at the edge of thought. No. My spine arched involuntarily. Pain flared along my sternum, not sharp, but crushing, as though unseen hands pressed inward from both sides of my ribs. The chanting intensified. The white thread binding my wrists tightened without being pulled. The whisper sharpened. This one is taken. My jaw clenched. My teeth ground together until pain shot through my temples. A cold pressure gathered behind my eyes, pressing outward, seeking escape. My body convulsed. Not violently. Deliberately. My spine bent backward beyond comfort. My shoulders pulled taut as though drawn by invisible cords. The breath forced from my lungs did not sound like my own. A second voice emerged from my throat, low, hollow, resonant with a depth that seemed to vibrate through the temple floor. This vessel is claimed. The monks did not stop chanting. Kittipong's voice rose above the others, sharp and commanding. The pressure inside my chest surged violently. My vision fractured into flashes of light and shadow. The smell of damp earth filled the hall, thick and suffocating. My back arched further. Something inside me pressed outward, testing bone and muscle as though measuring its confinement. Hungry, bound, hungry. The floor beneath me vibrated. A gust of wind slammed against the temple doors though the air outside had been still. Candles guttered wildly. Ash from the bowls lifted and spiraled into the air like dark snow. My fingers clawed at the thread binding my wrists. The second voice forced its way through my throat again, deeper now, layered with a faint wet resonance. This body is warm. This body feeds. Kittipong struck the floor with his palm. The chant rose to a piercing intensity. The thread circle trembled, vibrating like a plucked string. The pressure inside my chest reached a breaking point. I screamed. The sound tore from my lungs raw and ragged, my own voice at last, dragged upward through suffocating weight. A violent shudder convulsed through my body. Then, silence. I collapsed forward, gasping. The cold presence receded slightly, retreating deeper behind my ribs. My breath came ragged and painful, but it was mine again. The air in the temple warmed. Ash settled slowly to the floor. The candles steadied. The monks' chanting faded into stillness. Kittipong studied me with exhausted eyes. It is not gone, he said. I already knew. Inside my chest, the second rhythm remained, quieter now, but present. Listening. Waiting. He loosened the thread from my wrists. We have bound it, he continued softly, but hunger remembers its path. Outside, the sky had darkened unexpectedly. Thick clouds gathered over the forest, dimming the afternoon light. The air felt heavy, charged, as though a storm waited just beyond sight. As I rose to leave, the temple doors creaked open on their own. No wind entered. No sound followed. Only the distant, oppressive hush of the teak forest. And deep beneath my ribs, something stirred faintly. Not defeated. Only contained.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 15. What remains beneath the breath? I woke 3 days later on the temple floor. At first, I did not understand where I was. The woven mat beneath my cheek smelled faintly of incense and old straw. Pale daylight filtered through the open doors, turning the wooden pillars into long bands of muted gold. My body felt hollow. Not weak, hollow. As if something had been removed and the space left behind had not yet learned how to exist. When I inhaled, the air entered my lungs without resistance. No damp earth, no metallic tang, only the thin, dry scent of dust and smoke. For the first time in days, my breath felt like my own. I sat up slowly. No monks chanted, no candles burned, the hall stood empty. Outside, the sky stretched pale and cloudless above the fields. The silence felt different now, not the suffocating stillness that had pressed against the village before. But something fragile, as if the world held itself carefully in balance. I rose and stepped outside. The brass bells had been rehung beneath the eaves. They swayed faintly in the breeze, releasing soft, uneven chimes that sounded almost unfamiliar after so many days without wind. But there was no sign of Kittipong. No trace of the other monks. Inside the temple, their mats had been rolled and stacked. Ash bowls had been cleared away. The circle thread was gone, leaving only faint impressions in the dust. They had left without farewell. Or they had not left at all. No one in the village would say. Ban Nong Kam moved as it always had. Women washed rice in metal bowls. A boy chased a tire along the dirt road. Smoke rose from cooking fires and drifted into the open sky. Yet when people saw me, they did not turn away. They watched. Not with fear. Not with welcome. With quiet recognition. An old man at the roadside pressed his palms together briefly as I passed. A woman inclined her head. Her eyes solemn. No one spoke. But they no longer stepped back. Somchai's house stood where I had left it, leaning slightly toward the forest. In daylight, it looked smaller, more fragile, a structure worn thin by seasons of heat and rain. The bamboo fence cast thin shadows across the packed earth. The mound behind the yard lay undisturbed. No flies hovered. No dampness darkened the soil. The air smelled dry. I climbed the steps and entered. The interior felt lighter. Not brighter. Emptier. The oppressive weight that had once filled the space was gone, leaving a strange, hollow quiet in its wake. The jar remained against the wall. The cloth bindings had loosened completely. The crack across the lid had widened into a thin split, revealing the dark ash packed inside. No warmth radiated from it now. No pressure touched my skin. I approached slowly. For several moments, I simply stood there, listening. Nothing breathed beneath the floor. Nothing shifted within the jar. Only the faint creak of wood expanding in the midday heat. I knelt and placed my palm lightly against the clay surface. It felt cold. Lifeless. With steady hands, I carried the jar outside and walked to the pit behind the house. The soil parted easily this time, dry and loose beneath the spade. I lowered the jar into the earth and covered it without ceremony. No wind rose. No sound came from below. Only the dull thud of soil falling into place. When the last layer was smoothed flat, I pressed my palm against the mound. The ground remained still. That night, I remained in the house. Not out of courage. Out of necessity. The village quieted as darkness spread across the fields. Doors closed. Lamps dimmed. The teak forest became a black wall against the horizon. I lay on the mat, watching the ceiling beams fade into shadow. My breathing remained slow. Steady. My own. Hours passed. No dragging sounds circled the yard. No whispers stirred beneath the floor. No cold pressure gathered behind my ribs. At some point, exhaustion drew me into sleep. I woke in darkness. Not suddenly. Gradually. Something had disturbed the rhythm of the night. I listened. The house remained silent. The village beyond lay still. I inhaled. The air entered my lungs clean and dry. Then I heard it. A faint sound beneath the floor. So soft I thought it memory. A slow inhale. The woven mat beneath me lifted almost imperceptibly. Then settled. I did not move. I did not breathe. The silence stretched thin. Minutes passed. Nothing followed. At last, my lungs forced a shallow inhale. The air trembled faintly. From somewhere deep within my chest, a second rhythm stirred, weaker now. Distant as an echo carried through layers of earth. Not gone. Sleeping. Waiting. Outside, the teak forest stood unmoving beneath the stars. Inside my lungs, the air felt light. Yet beneath that breath, faint and patient, something lingered, not as hunger, not as possession, but as memory rooted deep where breath becomes life. And in the vast stillness of Ban Nong Kham, I understood what the monk had meant. Some things do not leave. They wait. They sleep. They remember the path back. They say that once the Ngai finds its way into a human breath, it never truly leaves, it only sleeps. In remote villages, beneath old wooden floors, in the damp smell of soil after rain, there are still things waiting. If one night you hear breathing that does not belong to you, do not turn around. And remember, some doors, once opened, can never be closed again.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.